like talking to Bill Fletcher so much is he just has a great historical groundedness to it. And I would check out all of Bill's work. It's very, very, very perceptive. Also, he's non-indulgent, which I like.
No, but I do respect him rolling with the background.
Oh yeah, totally. And he's got the super groovy background.
I'm all for normalized and cool backgrounds.
Normalized cool backgrounds. I think it's time to normalize the gem, the Griscom.
All right. So, we're in a pretty bizarre situation right now. Where every week it's sort of hard to tell the story of what's going on because there just really is so much happening. So I want to start with two numbers, a couple statistics, and then get into a larger story, which I've been sort of trying to tell, but I think we have a wider view of it now. The first would be, if you want an indicator of the serious desperation that's happening in the United States at the moment, it would be this, that the U.S. employment population ratio, right, plunged to 52.8% in May, which means that around 47.2% of Americans are jobless. Now that's different from unemployment, but in a lot of ways it's a better measure than unemployment, because unemployment just measures people who are actively looking for jobs versus people who can't get work. And let's contextualize these a little bit. Basically like the labor force, like the people who they estimate like are able to work, is around 60% of the population. So this drop off is really significant in just the amount of people who have fallen out of the labor force completely. And you can understand the basic rationale for it. If you were to become unemployed or had been unemployed before the pandemic, you wouldn't really feel very confident about your ability to go out and get a job at this moment, right? So like it would be very unlikely that you'd be inquiring in the first place or get picked up by the United States system of how we measure unemployment in this country. Now, I wanted to bring this up to compare that to the personal fortunes of a few folks, primarily the billionaires. So since the beginning of the pandemic, the wealth of United States billionaires grew $584 billion, which is about 20% overall in growth. And just to put some of these, in perspective, Jeff Bezos, his personal wealth has grown 38.7%. So that's been around $43.8 billion for his, entire net worth. Bill Gates, 11.7%. Mark Zuckerberg has seen incredible growth throughout the past 3 months, something around 58.6% in just personal net worth. And these aren't unique. This is the entire billionaire class that's done incredibly well over these past few months, while the rest of us have been so devastated. So there's been this really bizarre disconnect, right? As you see the employment numbers for the average person getting worse and worse, and then you see things like personal wealth of billionaires is growing. The stock market, has been very volatile, but you've also seen massive recoveries, especially recently. Why are there two different stories? And the fundamental, larger picture thing that I think people need to understand, it's simple. It's the Federal Reserve, which is at this point operating almost above the government. They are dictating the terms to Congress, and Congress, for the most part, is following through. So when they're asking for money, to be appropriated to them, they're getting those responses from the United States Congress in a way that we're just not seeing any kind of success in other federal organizations in dealing with this pandemic. And just remember, for example, after the financial crisis in 08, 09, what did they do during this mortgage crisis? Did they step in and protect the homeowners? No, they stepped in and they helped out the lenders. And what happened from that is when you see massive amount of foreclosures that could have been avoided, that should have been avoided, right? But you also saw a massive private squeeze where personal homes were turned into rental units across the board. You saw a massive business opportunity for a very small part of the population. And I highly suggest Robert Brenner has a piece in the New Left Review that just came out, and I believe it's unpaywalled, called Escalating Plunder, which really breaks down the Federal Reserve's actions over the past few months and how exceptional it is. But I really just wanted to, hit a couple of the points that he highlights on it. Fundamentally, what's happened over the past few months has been the Federal Reserve acting very aggressively. But one of the most consequential actions that the Federal Reserve has taken has been getting involved in the corporate bond market. So specifically, the Federal Reserve is the banker's bank. It's where banks go. It's not a bank that lends out to private corporations. Well, the Federal Reserve has fundamentally changed that dynamic over the past few months, and it's been buying corporate debt in primary and secondary markets. Now, just rewind a little while ago. Last year, we were talking about the explosion of corporate debt. Corporate debt existed on a massive scale in this country, one, because it was simple to do, because money was really cheap, and it was a kind of self-creating system. Because money was so cheap, it always just made more sense to borrow more money to pay off your debt, right? So then coronavirus comes in, and you start to see people get squeamish about, buying up debt because you don't think it's going to be repaid. Well, the Federal Reserve steps in and not only picks up a lot of it itself, but by basically stepping in such a large way, it sort of settled everyone's fears, because the Federal Reserve essentially was telling the business and investor and the corporate class of this country, no matter what, we will do everything that we can to make sure that your bottom line is okay. And remember that when we're talking about, these corporate bonds, there are two classes, which have a similar interest, but also have, opposition. One being the corporation itself, right? So the corporation needs to have, people buying their debt so that they continue to function, and also the lenders. And what the Federal Reserve really did was definitely helping out those corporations, but that super wealthy investor class, they really had their back, because if you started to see corporations go bankrupt, when they come to collect from those bankruptcies, those lenders, you would see corporations that have just been completely decimated, and most people understand are very overvalued in the first place. They actually don't have very much of value that they could, transfer over to that class. So we have this massive bubble that just has been reinflated essentially by the Federal Reserve, a double move basically to really entrench the system of debt that was really always going to create a problem sometime in the future. And now the Federal Reserve has basically taken this very strong position that has said that this is going to be the system for a very long time, and has massively expanded the role of the Federal Reserve in the private economy for the benefit of this small class of people. So we really are entering into a system where these the wealth of the few is still predicated on the exploitation of the many, but there's a buffer in between them that is the United States system, the Federal Reserve, now saying we're going to socialize the credit and your debt to make sure that you can withstand any shock. So that even if there are things that happen in the real economy and the productive economy, you will be sheltered from them because we will step in and block that. I think that being said, it means that we have to be more radical and creative in our organizing. I think what Bill Fletcher Jr. was saying about, for example, starting to organize the unemployed is something that the first statistic that we said at the beginning is something that we need to be looking at, because those people are a part of that system. That's why a lot of these corporations, when they got this extra money, they just laid people off, because they were basically understanding that they could survive on the debt. And then if they didn't have to pay wages to people, they do better in the short run. The system is fundamentally broken, but it is being insulated by our collective government, something that should be working for us, by a system that should be working for the people in general. But we have two managers of a cartel system, the Democratic and the Republican Party, that are willing to do everything they can to maintain the exploitation of the many by the few. It's something that's very unfortunate to realize, that these power structures are very much against us, but we can't have any illusions about, one, the role of those political parties in this system, and two, just the exceptional growth and power that the Federal Reserve has been able to achieve for itself over the past 2 years. And it's something we need to be very radical and real about what its function is in a democratic society.
You just watched a Michael Brooks Show video. Subscribe to get them all. Why wouldn't you? Don't be foolish. Click subscribe below and become a patron as well. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks, everybody.